To internalize the cost of CO2 emissions, we need to introduce carbon pricing policies. There are many different types of carbon pricing policies. We will focus on a few of the most important ones here and explain how these can be implemented. The learning objective for today is to understand how a carbon tax works and to discuss the benefits and challenges of implementing a carbon tax. We have already seen that determining a price on carbon can either be done through price-based methods or quantity-based methods. In this presentation, we are going to specifically look at price-based methods. In particular, one of the most commonly used price-based methods is the carbon tax. To explain how a carbon tax works, let's go back to the basic economics of the supply and demand curve. On the x-axis, we have the quantity of the product produced. On the y-axis, we have the price of the product at this quantity. The black curve represents the supply curve. In the blue, we have the demand curve. The intersection gives us the final market price of the product. A carbon tax adds a fixed price to every product that is produced, corresponding to how much CO2 is emitted during production. This is usually measured in euros per kilogram of CO2. Now the supplier's price will be the old price plus this tax. Effectively, this will increase the demand curve by a fixed amount, moving it up in the graph. This is represented here by the light blue curve. The carbon tax has raised the supply curve, and this has created a new intersection point with the demand curve. At this new intersection point, it now costs more money to produce the same quantity of product. A new market price is established that is higher than before. This also corresponds to a new production quantity, Q new. The price for the carbon tax is usually set by the government or by a regulator. But who pays this price in the end? The consumers or the producers? The answer depends on how the government has implemented the carbon tax. In normal circumstances, it will be the consumers who pay the final price. The producers will end up pushing the cost of the additional carbon tax onto the consumer. This can cause problems within society, as this additional tax can increase inequality if there are inadequate support systems to accommodate those who are most affected. Therefore, in a fairer world, one might say that it should be the producers that pay for the carbon emissions that they are producing. This would ensure that the producers are penalized properly if they produce too much carbon dioxide. This can be implemented by distributing the money gathered through taxation back to the consumers. This can be done in many ways. In Canada, for instance, it is done by sending a check to each person in the community, minimizing the effects of the tax on those that earn less and so are disproportionately affected by the policy. There are many benefits to implementing a carbon tax. Firstly, it is relatively simple to implement, as it only requires adding a fixed price to all products per kilogram of CO2 emitted. As the price of carbon is fixed, the government also knows how much money will be collected in advance. This is useful to allocate the money for other purposes, such as redistributing to the community or to be used for investment in public services. In this way, a carbon tax creates a double dividend. One dividend comes from the increased wealth creation from the tax itself, and the other comes from the reduced climate risks. If less CO2 is emitted, this will reduce the cost that we will have to spend in the future on preventing climate change. A carbon tax also provides incentives for technological innovation. It encourages emitters of CO2 to seek different technological solutions to try and reduce their emissions. Lastly, the flexibility of a carbon tax makes it possible to reach the established project objectives at a low cost. So the government does not have to make many changes to policy in order to still reach the objective of reducing CO2 emissions. On the other hand, there are many challenges to face when implementing a carbon tax. First, it is difficult to know what the optimal price of a carbon tax should be. If it is set too high, no one will be able to pay it. But if it is set too low, it will not have any effect in incentivizing producers to reduce their carbon emissions. There could also be a problem if a carbon tax is implemented in just one country or just one region. This may incentivize companies to leave that region and produce their products elsewhere, because it is cheaper there as there's no carbon tax. This can be harmful for the local economy as these companies are no longer investing in that region or that country. The best way to solve this is by implementing a global carbon tax, but this is very difficult to achieve in practice. Just as a carbon tax can drive out competitors, it can also prevent other companies from entering the market in that country. It therefore also affects the competitiveness in that region. A carbon tax can also be regressive in terms of income distribution and social welfare. When tax is implemented, producers usually push the cost onto the consumers, which can raise the price of basic commodities like fuel or food. This will disproportionately affect communities with a lower income as they have to spend a higher proportion of their income on these basic commodities. So, taxing these commodities will make inequality worse without any intervention from government. For this reason, a carbon tax is usually unpopular among the general population, as it causes the price of basic products to rise. And those with a low income understandably prioritize their basic needs over combating climate change. And it is obviously unpopular for the industries that are producing the products, as they have to pay extra and may lose some of their income. A carbon tax is one of the simplest price-based carbon pricing methods. It is already being used in many countries across the world. But what other forms of CO2 policy are there? What does a quantity-based instrument look like for putting a price on carbon?